Metaphor is a weird name for this new franchise, because there is absolutely no subtext in this game's messaging at all. Where most media would create a fictional concept to be used as a metaphor for a real-world issue, ReFantazio decides that it's just going to name its monsters humans and its evil energy anxiety, which is a really weird choice considering that its precursor persona is all about symbolism and fantasy elements having real-world allegories. The dungeons themselves are built out of a character's subconsciousness, with their darkest desires being made manifest, and it's up to the player to draw the parallels between the two worlds. But Metaphor makes the deliberate choice to not give any fantasy names to any of its interpretive elements, sometimes to the detriment of the story. I mean, sure, it's an extremely played out trope where there are mysterious monsters attacking everyone that turn out to be humans. Hell, this year alone, Stellar Blade already pulled that twist. But it didn't come right out of the gate and call them humans, then act like it was a big surprise when it turned out they were the natives of the world they lived in. I think this is the first time I've ever gone off script, and I think I'm going to leave this in, but the second I read the word natives, I just remembered that the monsters in Stellar Blades were called the Natibas. God damn it, point rescinded. But what's the rationale behind this decision? The humans still being given the standard twist actively hurts the narrative when it's blindly obvious to any literate soul. Well, if I had to guess, I would say it has to do with the game's other title, ReFantazio, which, while a word that exists neither in English nor Japanese, we can interpret some meaning from it. The re syllable implies a return, the fantasyllable would mean fantasy, and Zio is the lightning spell from Atlus games, which doesn't have any meaning in this context. But the return to fantasy aspect of the title, given what we know about the world now, could mean that the magical elements of ReFantazios are the inverse of our world. That's a horrible description, so let me try and break it down. In our world, we use fantastical words to describe things from fantasy, like dragons or magic. These things don't exist in our world, so these words are essentially nonsense sounds rather than having an etymology behind them. Although both these words come from Greek words, there's no origin behind them that I can find, and the Greek pantheon is one of humanity's first and largest fantasies. With Metaphor idolizing our world as a fantasy in the same way we do things like Middle-earth, bare fantasy words could refer to real things from our world, like humans and anxiety. This is a meta-narrative technique, which means that it's not used with the characters of the world in mind, but the player. It's meant to be a fourth wall breaking term that stops the player in their tracks and makes them question the mundane terminology of the most bizarre elements in the game. I believe all this ties back into how Metaphor contextualizes our world as an idealized fictitious world, in the same way we do so many fictional worlds humanity has created. I don't think there's a coincidence between how Metaphor refers to our society as a picturesque utopia of equality, while simultaneously having the negative elements of the world have inconspicuous names within the context of the setting. I would try and summarize this point here, but I actually can't figure it out, so when I started this video off by saying the game had no subtext, I was definitely being facetious. But the more curious example is Anxiety, which actually does have a traditional fantasy name, Magla. Now perhaps this name only exists to preserve the twist that Magla is indeed anxiety, but once that becomes clear, the core message of ReFantazio becomes obvious. It's a game about overcoming anxiety. Hell, you gain your powers by literally ripping your heart out and not letting the negativity cloud your mind. And when we apply what we know about anxiety to the humans of ReFantazio, I think there's a clear meaning as to what they are. Humans, the monsters, are former humans, the people, who were exposed to anxiety and evolved into these abominations. Anxiety is an emotion we're all familiar with. It's a feeling that occurs when you feel like you have no control over your life. It's a fear of the future, how unpredictable your life is going to be, as your mind is pulled in countless negative directions as you foresee unfortunate scenario after unfortunate scenario. This is represented in the design of the monsters. Cronenbergian creatures with abstract forms with little rhyme or reason that ties one human to another, showing how anxiety affects us all in different ways. Granted, I'm not entirely sure what kind of anxiety would manifest as a fish with legs, as it seems like that guy had some freaky stuff going on in his life, but it certainly paints him as an individual. While I still think there's some kind of connection between the naming of humans and the inverse relationship metaphor has with our reality, this more clear-cut interpretation is certainly going to be much more resonant with the player. I'll be back in 2 days. In the meantime, here's a video about how Metaphor ReFantazio has Atlus's best protagonist.